Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat? Are you as concerned as some seem to be at the Saints' seeming lack of activity since signing Marcus May?
I don't know if I'm necessarily concerned, but I will say that it is, disappointing in terms of what it is that people expected, right? Obviously, the expectations got way high up there in terms of what the New Orleans Saints would be able to turn around and do after they cleared nearly $30 million of cap space in their pursuit of Deshaun Watson. And now, so far, haven't really turned around and been able to flip any of that to add particularly talent over on the offensive side. But we have seen that they've been connected to free agents, particularly at wide receiver. We saw them just come up short on Marquez Valdez-Scantling, per some reports earlier today, before he ended up turning and heading over to Kansas City after they lost Tyreek Hill or traded away Tyreek Hill to the Dolphins. So it's the usual sort of rhythm of the New Orleans Saints offseason, right? Big free agent that happens that no one really kind of expected, and then a lot of in-house retention, and the rest has been sort of patiently waiting and shopping.
Yeah, it's bargain shop. They get the big ticket item,
Mm-hmm.
and then they shop the bargain rack.
Right.
It's kind of what they've always done. So let's kind of go there. Positions and maybe names that would make sense. Like, let's start with the offensive side of the ball. Mm-hmm. Are you assuming that the Saints are going to target and sign a free agent receiver?
I think so. I think that, there are some reports and some conversation that seems to be going on that's been connecting the Saints back to Tre'Quan Smith. We'll see what happens there. But even if they bring Tre'Quan Smith back, for instance, just like they brought back Deontay Hardy, formerly Deontay Harris, and then there's all the conversation around them looking to bring back Lil Jordan Humphrey as well, those don't check all the boxes, right? Those guys end up coming in and helping to compete and things like that. But in terms of finding that, let's just say, number 2 wide receiver opposite Michael Thomas, I think that there's still some search to be done there. And clearly they were looking to fill that role with a guy like Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Unfortunately, they missed there thanks to the Chiefs getting kind of involved in the 11th hour. But there are still some of those other guys, and especially as we're talking about bargain shopping, we know how it is with the New Orleans Saints, right? They have a price, they set it. If anybody tries to negotiate above that, they tend to move on. So if you look at some of the other bargain guys that are out there, one that really stands out, and he hasn't been the most consistent, but in terms of a guy that's a field stretcher and a deep threat, much like Marquez Valdez-Scantling is, Will Fuller would be another one that I would watch out for. He probably won't carry a huge price tag. He has some injury history. He has some dropping issues. I mean, he had 8 drops in the over the course of 2 years at one point, so that could be a little bit concerning. But he is definitely, one of those bargain bin type of guys that shows up in New Orleans kind of with the same type of concerns that Ted Ginn Jr. showed up with back in, 2017?
Mm-hmm.
And the Saints were able to make that work. So, I don't think that you're necessarily going to see the New Orleans Saints go out there and try to swing for the fence here for maybe, let's say, like an Odell Beckham Jr. who's going to be coming off of that ACL injury. But there are still some viable options out there that match around the range as the New Orleans Saints, I think, would be willing to spend to serve that role over in free agency.
Please tell me Tre'Quan Smith is done in New Orleans.
Look,
you almost made me vomit just now when you said his name.
Look, I think Tre'Quan Smith still serves a role in New Orleans. They like their blocking.
What, to massively disappoint me every damn Sunday for 4 years? No, thank you, Ross.
But also remember,
no,
we're not talking about Tre'Quan Smith coming in and challenging for the number 2 role. We're talking
he's
about
not
coming
challenging
in
for anything,
and maybe competing at the bottom of the depth chart. Like, that's really what we're talking about here. Like, the Saints still need depth, and they still need guys that are familiar with their system. It's not necessarily that Tre'Quan Smith's going to come in and solve all the problems. Like, there are still boxes left unchecked, even in the event of that resign.
I forbid it. Okay, what do they do at left tackle?
There's some interesting options. I mean, they could go the veteran stopgap route with guys like Eric Fisher, as well as Nate Solder, maybe even a guy like Dwayne Brown. Though I think Seattle is probably going to do everything that they can to keep Dwayne Brown around for at least another year, just to make sure that they don't have a completely wet napkin offensive line over there. But I do think that New Orleans has the opportunity to solve that left tackle spot in-house. We saw the 3 games that Teron Armstead missed, well, 2 games, and then a bunch of other snaps. He played only like 2 or 3 snaps in one of the other games, in which Jameis Winston was a starting quarterback over the course of those first 7 weeks. when he missed those games, James Hurst was the guy that stepped in at left tackle. And a lot of the pressure, even though there were 35, 37 pressures given up during those 3 weeks, a lot of it came from the left side, and 22 of those came from the Washington football team at the time, now Washington Commanders, thanks to Chase Young,
right.
Who gave them a lot of trouble over on the right side of the offensive line, not necessarily the left. So I think if you look at continuity, familiarity, cohesion, these things that have been themes for the New Orleans Saints over the course of the offseason so far, knowing Jameis Winston is very likely your starting quarterback in 2022, knowing that he has worked well with James Hurst at left tackle, there's some synergy there that makes a lot of sense. But they could go the veteran stopgap route and, of course, could target the draft the position as well.
No idea of Ramczyk flipping over to left?
I mean, I would entertain it personally, but, there's some things that are built into his contract in terms of the incentive. If he moves over to left tackle, he gets, second or first team All-Pro, then he gets another $1 million for the remainder of his contract per year. That's not a hindering incentive at all to do that. So absolutely, you could move Ryan Ramczyk over to left tackle if you feel like you can land a good right tackle, or if you feel better about James Hurst at right tackle than left, and you want to trust Ryan Ramczyk, who played that position in college at Wisconsin, with that, blind side blocking role. That's certainly something you can do as well in terms of the multi-position shuffle on the offensive line to help fill that left tackle hole.
Ross Jackson's with us, Locked On Saints podcast. Make sure you subscribe, listen every day. Also contributing right there at Saints Wire. He's on Twitter at Ross Jackson Nola. So Trevor Siemian, he's out there pursuing or being pursued by suitors. Or am I to understand that he's going to be done in New Orleans and Ian Book's going to be the backup?
Seems likely at this point. Some combination of Ian Book and then maybe Blake Bortles being the clipboard guy on the sideline. He's there on a future reserve deal. The good news about Trevor Siemian getting shopped around is that if he comes in with a contract and he Chase Daniels some way or another and gets a pretty nice contract out there, if he gets one that's over $3.5 million, then that ends up wiping out or counteracting the Saints signing of Marcus May, interestingly enough. So right now, Marcus May's signing is sort of countering what you would expect to be a third-round compensatory pick in 2023 for having lost Marcus Williams. So if somebody signs Trevor Siemian and they give him more than $3.5–4 million, somewhere around there, there's a chance that contract offsets the Marcus May contract, and the Saints are back in the running for that third-round pick in 2023, along with what you would expect to be a third or a fourth for Teron Armstead as well. So there's something about, actually rooting for Trevor Siemian to go and get signed somewhere and maybe to get a little bit of a bag wherever he goes, because it actually could work in the Saints' benefit, even though they would be losing that backup quarterback.
Yeah. Man, I was rooting for him to go just because he stinks. So now there's actually a greater
now you can
incentive
get
for that,
from
no
him.
doubt. Flip it over to the defensive side. Positions, they've already addressed safety. Positions you'd like to see him potentially address here before the draft?
Certainly, defensive tackle, I think, is a big one. I mean, you've got David Onyemata, and then you've got a bunch of young guys. And don't get me wrong, they went out there, they signed Kentavious Street. That's another one of the free agency signings that they've had this offseason. I believe one of only two outside the facility so far. But I think that he's one of those guys that comes in and maybe competes for the rotation, along with guys like Shai Tuttle and Jalen Dalton and so on, and maybe Albert Huggins as well. But I think you still have to get a bona fide pass rusher at that position. I wouldn't be surprised to see that be a spot that they target in the draft, potentially, maybe even as early as round one. I wouldn't be surprised to see them also try to dig into that position in free agency as well, though the options there, just like at wide receiver, just like they started to at quarterback, and just like they have on the offensive line, they're beginning to dwindle, right? We're getting late in the free agency here. We're third, fourth phase at this point. And so those are starting to dwindle. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, especially with the talent in the trenches in this year's draft, which is probably going to dominate maybe the top 12 selections or so, and then be able to run pretty deep into the third, fourth round in terms of potential starters that you can find. I wouldn't be surprised to see them target a defensive tackle in the draft as well to give them a bona fide starter next to David Onyemata.
You think Quan's back in New Orleans?
I'd love to see it. I mean, look, I think that you lost some of the leadership. I think when we talk about Teron Armstead, the initial reaction is going to be to talk about his play at left tackle, but there's also a leadership conversation to be had there as well. And I know Quan's on the defensive side, but these emotional leaders, these locker room leaders, these guys that bring energy, these guys that bring that swagger that brought Marcus May to New Orleans, like he specifically talked about that in terms of what that defense provides. I think Quan Alexander's a huge part of that, and he's somebody that gives you that sideline-to-sideline coverage guy, a guy that can blitz. Pete Werner did a great job stepping in last season, but I think that if nothing else, if you even wanted to just push Pete Werner further, bringing Quan Alexander back not only challenges him and helps to push his development, but it also gives you another veteran presence there that can be one of those, that can carry and have one of those leadership roles in New Orleans. We saw Craig Robertson recently just have his retirement press conference with the New Orleans Saints, and a lot of the things that a lot of the things that Craig Robertson brought to this team in terms of his energy, in terms of that leadership, in terms of all those kind of intangible pieces, I think Quan brings you now. So I think that, he would be a great investment for the team. I don't think that at this point in free agency, especially with all the other linebacker contracts that have already been given out there, like you look at maybe Jordan Hicks, who got his 2-year deal with Seattle, and if you're able to build off of that, then I think that gives you maybe at most a 1-year $5 million deal that you can kind of structure however you like. But I think that for the money that it would cost, I think Quan Alexander would be a really, really good return, a smart return for the New Orleans Saints this offseason.
All right, you get to pick at 18. Who are you taking?
At this point, considering that the wide receiver position is still kind of wide open there, I got to go wide receiver. I think the Saints can handle left tackle in their in-house, and they can also, again, take advantage of the deep trenches. But I think you've seen all these wide receivers come in and have such an immediate impact right off the bat in the NFL over and over and over again, and a lot of them, of course, coming from LSU, but there are other guys out there that can do that. So for me, I'm looking at guys like Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, maybe even Jamison Williams, if you get a better idea of sort of where his injury status is going to be. I'm looking for that deep threat, field-stretching wide receiver at 18, and I think I'll probably stay locked there throughout the rest of the offseason.
Hey, tell Tre'Quan to turn in his key card.
Would you rather Tre'Quan or would you rather
change the locks? Change the locks. Done with him forever. Don't bring him back here. I don't want to see him. Done. Take his name off his parking spot, his name off the locker, change the lock, turn in the key card, never to be seen or heard from again. He gone. Done with him.
You want to see the footage of him like Jamal Adams trying to punch his code into the door and the door just not opening. That's what you want to see.
That would be beautiful. Like Milton down in the basement looking for his stapler, whatever the case may be. Get out of here. Just be gone. All right, Ross Jackson on Twitter at Ross Jackson Nola, Locked On Saints podcast, contributing writer at Saints Wire. Y'all follow him on Twitter, listen to his podcast, subscribe to the podcast. If you don't, you should. Always appreciate it, man. Thanks for a few minutes.
Hey, buddy. Always a pleasure. Appreciate you, bud. Take care. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.